Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Sustaining Sustainability. I'm your host, CB Bhattacharya, and it is my great pleasure today to welcome Wayne Balta, who is the Vice President of Corporate Environmental Affairs and Product Safety at IBM Corporation. Wayne has global responsibility for environmental affairs, energy efficiency, and toxicology and chemical management, as well as product safety and related hardware compliance functions. Wayne, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, CB. I appreciate your asking me.
In your opinion, how would you say the tech industry as a whole has performed in terms of responding to the crisis?
It has enabled so many of us who are lucky to be able to continue to work remotely. If it weren't for tech, we wouldn't be able to do it. In fact, you and I wouldn't be doing what we're doing right now. Beyond that, there are companies across all industry sectors, not just tech, who have been trying hard to identify how they can most help the public response and bring some assets to the table. I know IBM is one company that has done a bunch of things to try to be helpful.
Can you give us some specific examples of how IBM is using data and digital technological innovation to help fight the spread of the virus?
Sure, yeah. And you know what? You said exactly what IBM's all about, data and digital transformation, via cloud. So in the case of the virus, one of the earliest things IBM did was work with the federal government to lead something called the High Performance Computing Consortium. And this was basically a recognition that the world's fastest supercomputers, which IBM happens to be behind, ought to be accessible to people to do massively parallel calculations in their searches for antiviral drugs and candidate vaccines. And so IBM spearheaded with the US administration a consortium to get supercomputing accessible. Another thing IBM has done is it has opened up something called COVID-19 Deep Search. COVID-19 Deep Search is really about enabling access to thousands and thousands of papers about coronaviruses in general, sort of an open research data set. In the same vein, we made something called Molecular Explorer. So imagine a digital platform on which you can simulate, the way chemicals react with each other and with biological matter. Something else we put out was a functional genomics platform, and that's a repository of all the newly sequenced public SARS genomes. So all the genomes for, severe respiratory syndromes over the last 20 years, and this is our third one in a generation, it's a repository for the genomics of those. We've made available a catalog called Micromedics, which is all about evidence-based drug and disease information. So those things are basically efforts to say, hey, here's ways that our best scientists can access information readily, quickly, and reliably. Our company, the Weather Company, which you may or may not know is an IBM company, has on the Weather app added a COVID-19 case tracker. So if you use the Weather app, if you look in the bottom right corner, you'll see that, and it's updated real time on a county by county basis across the US. One last thing I guess I'll mention, because I could probably go on forever, something called Watson Assistant. So Watson Assistant is basically a chatbot that we've made available to state and local governments to help them manage the quantity of phone calls that come in with diverse questions on everything from, should I wear a mask? Where can I get tested? How do I file for unemployment benefits? So that was basically using Watson Assistant to help manage the quantity of those inquiries.
Everybody who's been commenting on the reset opportunity that COVID affords talks about the need for greater collaboration between government and industry. And I know, of course, IBM has already been engaged in some of those. Could you describe a couple of these projects for our listeners and talk about the importance of cross-sector collaboration at this point in time?
Sure. It's almost hard for folks like CBU and me to imagine how are we in the world going to do this without cross-sector collaboration. As one company, IBM has a long history of working with government, diverse government agencies around the world, obviously private sector companies, but also a range of other organizations across civil society who have a common interest in solving a problem. If you think about what's possible today with what some have called the fourth industrial revolution, meaning data and advanced IT tools, I personally am convinced that there exist today opportunities to tackle longstanding environmental sustainability challenges in completely new ways. So I don't want to suggest that technology can solve an environmental problem because I think that's an overstatement. But I do strongly believe that data and technology can and should underpin new solutions to problems that just don't seem to ever get improved upon. And you know what, CB? The key thing is data. It all starts with the data because none of these IT tools that you'll see in marketing and PR campaigns are any good without data. Now, to your question about cross sector collaboration, the question then becomes who has the data? What are the data? Can I have access to the data? Will you share your data with me? And once we understand between industry and government and NGOs who possesses what data, what shape they're in, are they organized? Are they a complete mess? Once we get a hold of that, I personally believe that all of these IT tools we hear about, generically artificial intelligence, they will then be able to be deployed to underpin new solutions to problems that need to be looked at in different ways.
Given your expertise in energy efficiency and the technologies that support green energy infrastructure, where do you see the major investment opportunities?
Well, I think we'd all agree we need to look at the existing infrastructure that we've already created and ask, how do we make it more energy efficient? How do we cause renewable electricity to become further integrated onto routine electric grids so that it is the new normal instead of something you have to procure as an exception? And obviously, technology can enable that. If you look at the built environment, there's a lot of work one can do with what we have called smarter buildings in the past. Today, a huge portion of IBM's global real estate has the smarter building solution enabled. It reduces our energy bill and our consumption every year. So, for the existing infrastructure, it's just a matter of continually optimizing it. Technology has been a savior for us in being able to communicate with each other, order groceries online, track supply chains of critical materials, and the like. So I don't think we can do without it. But at the same time, I think it's important to also recognize not everything that technology enables is automatically good. We ought to ask ourselves, is the way in which goods and services are produced and distributed around the world the ideal way for the environment and climate? Do I really need to have a $6 toaster made halfway around the world and put on airplanes and then trucks and then neighborhood delivery vans to come to my front door? What are the climate implications behind all that transport? Okay, those kind of questions might increasingly get asked in the midst of reviewing overall supply chains.
Have you seen any unusual or unexpected shifts in demand for some of IBM's greener products or services over the past few months?
Well, I would say that our goal at IBM is to design all of our products and services to be green. So I wouldn't necessarily say we have some that are green and some that are brown. And the one example I can give you is a machine that we call the Z15. I think the general public would think of it as a mainframe. Some people hear the word mainframe and they think, oh, that's so old tech. Oh, that's like so 30 years ago. And let me tell you, it sure isn't that at all. If you look at servers, and if you look at the servers that populate data centers, and if you're in the industry, and if you understand how much of a machine's capacity actually gets used and how energy efficient it is, It wouldn't take you long to figure out that we could probably get a whole bunch of computing done with a lesser number of machines and using machines that are far more efficient and can have a lot of workload virtualized on them. That little old machine that some people call a mainframe, which we call it in its present generation the Z15, happens to be the most energy efficient server one can acquire, either for an on-premises private cloud or to be used in a data center for large public cloud. So demand for those machines is up. I mean, if you look at IBM's systems business and you look at the revenue, you'll see that publicly reported. Demand for those machines is high because they can handle so many transactions where the bulk of the machine's capacity is actually put to work instead of persisting with machines that are only used for 20% of what they can actually do.
Now, managers are often inundated with information about all of the ways they could improving their business practices. But when it comes to investing in green their operations through technological digital solutions, where would you advise that they start?
First of all, to stay the course, recognize that the pandemic is not a reason to de-emphasize any of your sustainability objectives. To the contrary, it's a reason to cement them even further. And always focus on the facts. Be candid. Practice straight talk. Don't tell people what they want to hear. Don't get caught up in excessive marketing or hype or greenwashing, but just look at the facts, at what opportunities are in front of you, and what business processes and decisions are needed to actually achieve improvement. If you're doing something in your business that's good for both the environment and your business, it'll sustain itself. If you're doing something that's just the flavor of the month to placate somebody who wants to hear you say that, that might not be sustainable.
Do you have any recommendations, for consumers in terms how they could be using their purchasing power to make more sustainable choices that help drive innovation in the technology sector?
If I'm a consumer, you're a consumer, there's so much conflicting information that may come to us. I would pay attention to claims about green products, use your own judgment, let your instinct be your guide. Ask if the products and services you're using in a sort of a big picture, a large life cycle, a large boundary condition are generally good for the environment. Remember my example about the $4 toaster made on the other side of the world? Does it really have to be transported across airplanes and cars and trucks and all the emissions inherent in that, even if that toaster was made with a green cable? It's sort of the whole life cycle question. If consumers focus on the life cycle issue, it'll help us realize what are the big problems versus the small problems. And, to the extent you can, continue to try to make choices that are good for your local community. I think in food production, we can practice this even more and just understand the broad implications in the things we choose to do. Single-use plastics is another example. Certain plastics in society are absolutely critical. If you go to a hospital, let me tell you, you need plastics. But at the same time, as consumers, we might ask ourselves, do we really need all the single-use disposable plastics that we seem to be in love with? So those are some examples to think about.
Wayne Balta, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure having you on our program.
Thanks, CB, and I'm so glad for the University of Pittsburgh and its new center. I'm really proud of you guys for doing what you're doing.
This is your host, CB Bhattacharya, signing off for today. Please join me next week for another edition of Sustaining Sustainability. This podcast is made possible by the help of my colleagues, Leslie Marshall, who's the Associate Director of the Center for Sustainable Business, and Alyssa Martinek, who is the Sustainability Coordinator of the Center for Sustainable Business. I'm your host, CB Bhattacharya, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.